Hey guys, welcome to A Fistful of Dice, and welcome to episode 1 of my new video series, which is entitled Campaign Crafting. In the previous episode, I just gave a brief introduction about what this video series is going to entail and what you can expect from it down the line here. I'm going to be doing this video series over the course of the summer as I build my own campaign that I'm planning on running here in a few months. It'll be beneficial for you guys because I'll be giving some general techniques and tips while also explaining how I use those tips and techniques in practice in coming up with my own campaign. So I'm hoping that the combination of general, universal advice combined with the specific ideas will really help you guys in building your campaigns and your world this summer, because now's the time to be creative. So I hope you guys will be able to make out my horrible penmanship here, but I figured having a visual aid would be helpful for me and you. So in this first episode, which I've entitled The Brainstorm, we're going to be talking about the very beginnings of world building. This is almost the spark of your world, of your campaign. This brainstorming sort of time is when you come up with what I like to call the pillars. And the pillars can really be anything. They can be a character, a location, a magical item, a specific scene or event, a god. It's something that just sort of pops into your head out of nowhere, and it's almost the moment of inspiration for the campaign. So a pillar can be something as simple as a concept, like, you know, a continent that is completely covered in a dense jungle, or it can be as specific as a character with a name and a backstory. And what these pillars do is they give you something to drape the campaign over. These are the main ideas that you want to bring into the campaign, that you want to have be a presence throughout. These are going to be the important things in your campaign, and they're usually, at least for me, in the process, what happens first creatively. So we're going to use the campaign that I'm building right now as an example, and when I'm building this campaign, I have several things that I think of right off the bat. The first one is a shard world. I really hope you guys can read this okay. And what I mean by shard world is the idea of a planet or a world that is not a perfect sphere and also not a flat disk, but rather more of a hunk of a world. Something that used to be whole but is no longer, whether by magic or some catastrophic event or a combination of the two. This shard world has sort of been drifting out on its own while it used to be part of a bigger world. So that was something that immediately popped into my head, was having a shard world. And the reason I like that is because it gives me kind of the feel of a flat or disk world, which is fairly prevalent in fantasy, but also kind of doesn't take away from being able to have things underneath the planet and also have it not be a perfect circular. And plus, it's just kind of neat and unique to have a world that is just this shard of Earth kind of floating through the void. So that was something I definitely wanted to do. The next idea that I had was this thing called the Crucible. And every fantasy world, or most fantasy worlds, have their own idea about magic and where magic comes from. Sometimes it's the gods, sometimes it's the elements, sometimes it's magical creatures, sometimes it's a flow of energy moving between the planes, like the oh man, what's it called? The weave. That's what it's called, the weave. Like in the Forgotten Realms. And I came up with this idea of having essentially a large, perfectly spherical structure somewhere on this world that many believe is the source of magic. And having this object, this structure, this just massive thing, completely alien in origin and appearance, be not only the source of magic, but the main source of strife in this world. So you have this structure that sort of acts as something of a mecca for the people of this world, at least some of the cultures, who believe that the crucible, as I've called it, is something that is vital for the survival and the prosperity of their race, of their faction, of their city, culture, whatever. I like the idea of this large, almost futuristic, kind of science fiction-looking structure in the middle of a fantasy medieval world. As I kind of start to develop this idea, I decide that it's going to be located in the frozen north, and that it's going to be controlled by the dwarves. So the dwarves of my world are going to control the crucible. Now we've got a couple of unique things here, and this world's starting to come together and it's starting to develop its own unique flavor. We've got the shard world concept, the idea that this world is not entirely a whole sphere. It's not your typical planet. It's not a disk world either. And this idea of the crucible, this massive structure which has been sealed for as long as anyone can remember, kind of hanging out in the frozen north, just sitting up there in the middle of the tundra, currently being held by dwarves. And the idea that this is the source of magic. You know, and at this stage I'm not sure why it's the source of magic. I'm not sure how it is. Since coming up with this, I have decided why, and we'll get to that later. But so we've got the crucible is the source of magic. So right there we've got an interesting idea for where magic comes from in this world. And we've got something that we can have present throughout the campaign. It's a pillar with which we can develop our campaign and develop our world. And then the third idea is orcs as Mongols. So I've always been really interested in the Mongols, Genghis Khan and the Mongols, and I've read a few books on them, and I've always just found the culture and their empire very fascinating, and I really like reading about, you know, the crazy strategies and tactics that Genghis Khan and his generals used, you know, and this massive empire that they built up, and how they just kind of came out of nowhere, out of this kind of harsh land known as the steppe, and were just this united front that were mobile and maneuverable, and were using tactics that no one had ever thought of. And I had this idea of, what if there was a place like this in my world where the orcs lived? So a place like the steppe, you know, sort of inhospitable, this region that has sort of bred people to be extraordinary. The climate and the life there has sort of forced them to be strong, be smart to survive. So I had this idea of, what if completely out of nowhere a massive unified orc army, complete with cavalry, a charismatic leader, and technology and tactics that no one had ever seen before, suddenly invaded this land. And that to me seems like a pretty kind of neat, unique idea. And some of the things I've come up with here are that the leader is a half-orc. So that kind of has some cool ideas to it. And that they might have some early, sorry, my handwriting is just awful, firearms. So now we've got some black powder weapons coming into play here, and I'm always very hesitant to add black powder weaponry into my fantasy settings, and if I do so, I do it very sparingly. And in this case, they're going to be very, very early sort of arquebus type, what are they called? Sort of like early Chinese firearms, black powder weapons. So very unreliable, very untested, but still quite devastating when used effectively, and the orcs are most definitely going to use them effectively. So, and then the final thing that I've come up with here as a pillar for my world is the kiln, which is a volcano prison. So in a campaign a while ago, I had a prison that was an ice prison, and they would freeze their inmates in essentially what was magical cryosleep. I'm kind of going to do something different here with this idea of the kiln, and having a prison that is built within an active volcano. Now out of this, some more ideas sprung of the idea of magma forges. So forges that use magma as their heat source. Oh geez, you can't really see it, can you? There we go. And then from there, I thought adamantium. So now I've got this idea of a prison installation that uses its inmates as essentially slave labor to process adamantium, which requires such high heat to melt down and work that the only place you can do it is in the magma forges of the kiln. So essentially, the worst of the worst come here, and they're forced to create adamantium for the rest of the continent. So here we have our four pillars. We've got the idea of the shard world, we've got the idea of the crucible, the source of magic, we've got this possible conflict with the orcs sort of acting as a Mongol army, sort of coming into the civilized regions of this world, and we have the idea of the kiln, a prison installation. Now, all four of these things are interesting, and even just looking at them, I come up with lots of different ideas for adventures and sessions and magical items, NPCs, factions to be involved with these things. I'm thinking about what factions want the crucible. Are they fighting each other over it? How long have the dwarves held it? Why are they holding it? Then I think of the orcs as Mongols. Have the orcs sort of been dismissed at this point? Has no one seen this coming? Are they truly surprise attacking all of these civilized nations? Maybe the factions are so busy fighting over the crucible that they don't have the resources or the manpower to repel this orc army. So what are they going to do about it? Then we've got the kiln. Maybe this half-orc leader who's leading this sort of Mongol empire of orcs has escaped from the kiln. Maybe they were a former inmate there, and maybe that has something to do with why they've unified these orc armies. So you see how this is sort of working, just with these very basic things that have sort of popped into my head that at first sort of seem disjointed and not like they're going to be connected at all. They're sort of separate ideas. All of a sudden, I'm drawing lines between all of these things and sort of coming up with connections and things to sort of bring this world together. Maybe the crucible is the reason why this world is a shard world. Maybe it had something to do with it breaking apart from the rest of the planet. So, for your campaign, I want you to think about the pillars. The maybe 3, 4, 5 things that have popped into your head in the brainstorming that you want to sort of drape around, or have your campaign drape around. So these things are going to be the hinges that the conflicts and the intrigue of your world is going to stem from. So what are the pillars of your campaign? I'm interested to know. Why don't you leave a comment below, and we'll come up with a campaign together, okay? Alright guys, I hope you've enjoyed this first episode of campaign crafting. In episode 2, we're going to be talking about setting the tone, and we're going to be talking about what sort of setting we're going to use here, and what sort of tone and sort of mood that we're going to go for in our campaign. So that's going to be it from me, guys. Take care, and happy gaming all.